I'll go ahead and get started. It is a little bit windy here today. I'm up at Fort Humboldt, so please let me know if you are joining. If it's super windy and the audio is terrible, let me know and I'll try and move a little bit and get somewhere where there's a little bit less exposure. I wanted to start here, however, because this is a special place. So I'm gonna go ahead. Nobody's here yet. Okay, came back here, walking across the field, trying to find some place where we can get connected. So here we are. Hopefully we'll stay connected here. For those of you who have joined our Facebook Lives before, here at Fort Humboldt, you know that our connectivity is not always reliable here at Fort Humboldt. So I wanted to talk about where our water comes from, and there is a special feature here at Fort Humboldt that I wanted to show you all. Unfortunately, everybody, thanks so much for being here with me today. My name is Kyle, and I'm a Park Interpretive Specialist with California State Parks. Today I want to talk about water. Okay, should be back now. Now we're on Wi-Fi. Sorry about all of these disconnecting and all sorts of things. I am a little bit of persistence with staying with this video because in the very beginning I was where I wanted to be. So one of the really cool things about Fort Humboldt is that when you visit this place, as you drive up the road to come and visit the park, you are passing kind of this riparian area, this area where there's a bunch of vegetation growing near a water source. And while you might never know that there's water there, you can tell by some of the plants that grow in the area that there's a source of water over there. And so as you drive into Fort Humboldt, this is up on your right. So you'll see this kind of plants and things on your right, and this is in the very beginning of the video, was in the background. And that area, that water, was at one time the only source of drinking water for the soldiers who were serving at Fort Humboldt. And so that's what I want to talk to you all about today, is where your water comes from. And a little bit about water storage, a little bit about how we get our water. And if any of you know where your drinking water comes from, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. So let's talk about water. I'm going to keep it relatively short. I'm going to give you all some resources, and hopefully this will inspire you all to go and find out where your own water comes from. So I'm going to give you some resources at. So first, let's talk about where water comes from. Well, the first thing to understand about where water comes from is what a watershed is. And so a watershed is basically everywhere that a water ends up. So for example, we're near the Mad River. And within the Mad River watershed is anywhere that when it rains, that water all comes into the Mad River. All the water that falls on the land is shed basically into the water. No, a watershed is not a physical wooden shed that's built on the water. It is basically an entire area where when it rains, all that water is collected to one place. So the Mad River watershed is everywhere that water falls that will basically eventually end up in the Mad River. So that's kind of fundamental, right? When rain falls, that's giving us our fresh water. And so there are a couple of main ways that we store the water that we collect basically through these watersheds. And so those main things are reservoirs and dams, streams and rivers. And then the two that I want to kind of expound on a little bit today is groundwater, which is water that we find underground, as well as the importance of snowpack. So a lot of us, we're getting kind of towards the end of the winter here, and a lot of us are probably wondering, you know, if we got good rain this year, if we got enough rain to make it through the summer. You know, living in California, we kind of think about that as we get into the summer. Is this going to be a drought year? Are we going to need to conserve water? This is awesome. Michael LaFleur just said, Lakewood, California, water comes from underground wells supplied by a very large Southern California aquifer. So they're storing their water underground, basically groundwater. Awesome. So, where does my water come from? So I live in McKinleyville, which is near Arcata, and Eureka, where Fort Humboldt is. I'm about a half an hour north of here. And so for McKinleyville, we have what's called the McKinleyville Community Services District. And they're the people who are literally providing the water and making sure that it's getting to the houses. But they're actually purchasing the water through the Humboldt Bay Municipalities District. And so Humboldt Bay Municipalities District is basically supplying water for all the different communities in this area. And they have a large reservoir where they get most of it from called Ruth Lake. And so I looked up before coming here to see how our local reservoir is doing, where I get water from, and currently it is at 103% capacity. So that's good news. The reservoir is full and actually has a little bit of an overflow. It's a little bit extra full. And so that's good news. We've been getting some good rain up here. So reservoirs and dams is a pretty regular way that water is stored, basically man-made water storage, where water is kept and then distributed, and occasionally they're generating hydropower out of these places as well. That's really the way that we really see water stored a lot of the time. Sometimes water is extracted directly from streams and rivers and things like that, so instead of having a place where that water is stored and then sent other places, it's able to be collected directly from a natural source. Basically, there doesn't have to be as much of a facility like to block the stream and things like that. So, drawing directly from rivers and streams. So, groundwater is the next one that I wanted to talk about. This is a little bit more complicated, and how this gets replenished is really, really important. So, water can be stored underground in aquifers and little underground spaces. Water can flow, and that is the way that the soldiers here at Fort Humboldt got their water. That area over there that it collects fresh water as it rains, but it's also fed by an underground spring that is replenishing that water source. And that's a really important way that water can be stored that we might not even see. Now, what's important about groundwater, when we have these, when we're drawing from wells and things like that, we can deplete groundwater, and it's a little bit harder for it to replenish than on surface sources. And what you need for groundwater to be able to replenish itself is continued rain. So that's why when we're looking at like a rainy season, it's not just important that we have like a lot of rain. It's important that we have consistent rain that's keeping the ground wet. Because if the ground is wet and saturated with water, the water is going deep down into the earth and refilling those aquifers and those underground water storages, which is really, really important when we get into times of drought and when we start to run out of our surface water. That groundwater is where we look for some of those reservoirs and some of those backups to keep us, having fresh water, which is so important for our life. The last one I want to touch on really quick is snowpack. And this is what really kind of inspired me to talk about this, because up here in Humboldt County, about a year ago, we had snow in some of the lower laying areas. And so it was really cool to drive around this area and see just on top of the hills, packed with snow. And what's really important about snowpack is that this is kind of, again, sustaining surface water through the summer and when it starts to get warmer. We're going to first, this is the water that as the snow melts, this is going to keep those rivers and streams flowing, and this is going to keep our reservoirs and dams and things replenished with that. As that snow melts, the water is going to come into those areas. So I did a little bit of research, and I found it pretty remarkable that snowpack actually makes up about 1/3 of the total water that we drink. So that's a lot of water that we're kind of relying on through the summer and through those warmer months. As that snow melts, that's kind of continuing to refresh and replenish our water sources where we're not necessarily getting rain at the same time. So I have two main resources that I kind of checked to get this information, and I'll be plugging those into the description as well if you'd like to come back and check them out. But they are watereducation.org, which will tell you a little bit more about each of these kind of water storages and why they are important. And then the other one, just like you have Parks website for California, you've got a water website for California. So you can head over to water.ca.gov to learn more about where your water comes from. And you can also check on our current water storage and to see, like, with the winter that we've been having, how is our water supply looking? So I did some kind of general checking on our numbers, and this is where I found too that number for Ruth Lake, my kind of local reservoir, being at 103%. That's great to hear. What's not so exciting or not so great to hear is that when we look at kind of our average annual rainfall, and so we're looking at our average precipitation this year at this time is about 50% of our average rainfall. So that's not necessarily a good sign when we're looking towards the summer, that at this point in the winter we've only had about 50% of our average waterfall during this time. Something that gives me a little bit more information on that, we didn't necessarily get a whole lot of rain, so I started to look at our snowpack to see how much snow we got, and that again is what I've kind of been looking around, looking at our hills and stuff in this area, is seeing what our snowpack looks like. And up in my area, basically northern Sierra, Trinity Mountains is about 66% of its average snowpack. So we're looking at about 50% of average precipitation and about 66%, almost 70% of our average snowpack. So we're a little bit behind in this year, but not as bad as we've been in previous years where we've been in pretty serious drought in California. So this is just something to kind of keep your eye on if you are interested in learning about water and where your water comes from. Check out those websites, water.ca.gov and watereducation.org, where you can learn more about where your water comes from. And you can also learn a little bit about the history of how, water was given to your area. Found it really interesting that at one time McKinleyville was all run off of well water because there wasn't a whole lot of people living there. Now with a lot more population, they've had to look at different ways to get water. And I think Fort Humboldt's an incredible example as well. They had one single, basically freshwater spring that was providing water for up to 90 soldiers who were stationed here at Fort Humboldt. So, just some incredible things about water, some things to keep your eye on as we're kind of getting towards the winter, or getting towards the end of the winter, excuse me. If you want to check out where your water comes from, if you want to check out our snowpack, see how our precipitation is compared to average years, there's some great graphics on that website and tons more to learn about where your water comes from. I'm going to go through here real quick, see if we have any questions. See hellos. Hello, Darlene. Sorry that the video was breaking up early on in the beginning. I'm glad we were able to get some secure connection here towards the end. Hopefully the wind wasn't too bad. I kind of got a little sheltered area over here. Well water up in western Massachusetts from Nina. Awesome. Brentwood, Los Vaqueros Dam. Yes, I used to live in that area. Excellent. For Southern California, there's a California aqueduct bringing water from the San Joaquin, Sacramento River Delta. There's tons of amazing ways that water is transported as well. Just wanted to give you all a taste of kind of where your water comes from and some resources for you to check out if you want to learn more. Thank you all so much for joining me here today for our very, very short Facebook Live here at Fort Humboldt. Again, sorry about those connection issues, but thank you all who hung out with me to learn a little bit more about where your water comes from. I'll post those resources in the description, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.